For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council's classification system had never been wrong. Class 13 Deathworlds were evolutionary dead ends. Planets so hostile that any species emerging from them would be too damaged, too primitive, too broken to ever reach the stars. Earth had worn that label like a curse, its inhabitants dismissed as another failed experiment in a galaxy full of civilized races. But when humanity finally broke free from their prison world and stepped into the cosmic arena, they didn't just shatter expectations. They rewrote the very definition of what it meant to be alive in a universe that had forgotten how to fight for survival. The Galactic Council's Grand Assembly Hall hummed with the soft blue glow of 10,000 bioluminescent delegates, their conversation creating a gentle symphony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones that had echoed through these crystalline walls for millennia. High above the circular chamber, the Great Classification Board displayed the current census of known intelligent species across the galaxy, each entry glowing with the soft pride of civilized achievement. Ambassador Zethkri of the Altarian Collective adjusted her ceremonial breathing apparatus and reviewed the day's agenda on her neural implant. Another routine classification hearing, another primitive species requesting recognition and membership. The pattern had remained unchanged for 3,000 standard galactic years, since the last Great War ended, bringing peace and order to their corner of the universe. The war that no living delegate remembered, but whose lessons had shaped every policy, every classification, every careful decision that kept their civilized galaxy stable and safe. Attention, esteemed delegates! The Assembly's AI announced in perfect harmonic translation across 47 languages. We now present Case File 4,847,291, Classification Review for Species Designate Homo sapiens of Planet Sol. 3. Currently classified as Class 13 Deathworld inhabitants. A ripple of mild interest passed through the Assembly. Class 13 reviews were rare, mostly because Class 13 species rarely survived long enough to develop spaceflight. Zethkri pulled up the file, expecting the usual sad story of a species that had somehow crawled out of their hellish homeworld only to beg for protection and resources from their civilized neighbors. What she found instead made her breathing apparatus flutter in confusion. The species called themselves humans, and according to the preliminary reports, they had not only achieved faster-than-light travel independently, but had done so using technology that violated several fundamental principles of safe galactic engineering. Worse yet, they had arrived at the galaxy's edge not in the usual desperate refugee vessels, but in what could only be described as warships. The delegation from Sol, 3 requests permission to enter. The AI continued. Granted, responded Council Prime Velcris, the ancient Thylorian who had guided the Assembly for over 4 centuries. His massive bulk shifted on the ceremonial dais, tentacles arranging themselves in the traditional pattern of judicial authority. The great doors of the assembly hall began to open, and Zethkri found herself leaning forward, despite her training in diplomatic composure. In her 2 centuries of service, she had seen representatives from over 1,000 species, from the ethereal gas beings of the nebula reaches to the rock-hard silicon life-forms of the deep core worlds. Each had arrived with the proper humility expected of species seeking recognition, their biosignatures reading as appropriately cautious in the presence of their galactic superiors. The humans who walked through those doors radiated something entirely different. There were 3 of them, bipedal creatures that moved with a fluid grace that reminded Zethkri uncomfortably of the predators from her homeworld's ancient past. They wore simple clothing that seemed to serve no ceremonial purpose, and their biosignatures were unlike anything in the galactic database. Where most species showed the complex patterns of specialized evolution, enhanced cognitive centers, improved sensory organs, reduced muscle mass in favor of increased brain capacity, these humans showed no such specialization at all. They were, according to every measurement the Assembly's sensors could take, completely and utterly average in every biological category. Yet they moved through the hall with the confidence of apex predators. The lead human stepped forward and performed what might charitably be called a bow, though it looked more like a brief nod of acknowledgement between equals. When he spoke, his words were translated through the Assembly's systems, but something in his vocal patterns made Zethkri's primitive brainstem tingle with warnings her civilized mind couldn't quite process. "Honored delegates of the Galactic Council," the human said, "I am Captain Sarah Chen, representing the United Earth Coalition. We come seeking recognition as an independent species and requesting trade agreements with your various civilizations. Council Prime Velcris consulted his ceremonial datapad, though Zethkri knew he had already memorized every detail of the case. Captain Chen, our records indicate your homeworld, designated Sol, 3 or Earth in your language, holds a Class 13 Deathworld classification. This designation indicates an environment so hostile that any species evolving there would be considered permanently compromised in terms of interstellar viability. The human Captain Chen tilted her head slightly, and something that might have been amusement flickered across her features. Compromised how, exactly? Standard galactic biology indicates that species from Class 13 worlds develop along predictable patterns, Velcris replied, settling into the routine explanation he had given countless times. Extreme aggression, inability to cooperate with other species, technological development focused exclusively on weapons and survival, and most critically, psychological instability that makes them unsuitable for the complex diplomatic and social structures necessary for galactic citizenship. Zethkri watched as the 3 humans exchanged glances, and she realized with growing unease that they were communicating through subtle facial expressions and body language in a way that their translation system couldn't interpret. It was a form of communication so sophisticated that her own species, despite their advanced telepathic abilities, couldn't decode it. I see, Captain Chen said. And this classification system has been accurate in the past? Without exception, Velcris stated proudly. In 3,000 years, we have encountered 47 Class 13 species. 39 destroyed themselves before achieving spaceflight. 7 requested immediate relocation to protected reservation worlds upon making contact. 1 attempted to attack our survey ships and was regrettably eliminated in self-defense. And what happened to the one that wasn't accounted for in those numbers? Chen asked quietly. The hall fell silent. Even the usual background hum of the bioluminescent delegates faded, as a collective unease settled over the assembly. Zethkri found herself accessing historical files she had never needed to review, searching for references to something that seemed to have been carefully omitted from standard galactic records. There was no additional species, Velcris said, but his harmonic voice carried undertones that every delegate present could interpret as uncertainty. The second human, who had been introduced as Dr. James Park, stepped forward carrying a device that Zethkri's sensors couldn't identify. Actually, there was. Species designation Kethvar, homeworld Keth Prime, reclassified from Class 13 to extinct approximately 3,000 years ago after what your records describe as successful integration into galactic civilization. Dr. Park activated his device, and the air above the assembly floor shimmered with a holographic display that made every delegate's emergency systems trigger simultaneously. The image showed a battle scene of such devastating scope that Zethkri's mind struggled to process it. Vast fleets of ships locked in combat, entire star systems burning, weapons that could crack planets being used as casually as her people might use farming tools. The Kethvar weren't eliminated by the Galactic Council. Dr. Park continued calmly, as images of destruction played out above the stunned delegates. They were the Galactic Council, or rather, they were the species that ruled this section of the galaxy before the current council existed. Your Great War 3,000 years ago wasn't a war between multiple species. It was a war against one species, the Kethvar. The third human, introduced as Commander Lu Wei, spoke for the first time. They had evolved on a Class 13 world. They had survived everything their planet could throw at them, and they had grown strong. When they reached the stars, they didn't ask for protection or resources. They took what they needed. Within 500 years, they controlled over half of what you now call the civilized galaxy. Captain Chen gestured to the holographic display, which now showed detailed tactical analyses of battles fought with technology that surpassed anything currently in use by Council species. It took an alliance of every other spacefaring species in this region, fighting together for over 2 centuries, to finally stop them. The final battle required the destruction of 17 star systems and the extinction of dozens of species to ensure the Kethvar couldn't continue their expansion. That's not possible, stammered Delegate Yurtak of the Centauri Republic. Our historical records clearly show that the Great War was a conflict resolution between equals, ended by the Treaty of Harmonic Convergence. Your historical records were edited, Dr. Park said, his device now displaying what appeared to be original documents and data files. The surviving species of the Anti-Kethvar Alliance agreed that knowledge of what a Class 13 species was truly capable of should be suppressed. They created the current galactic order specifically to prevent another Kethvar situation. The classification system, the council structure, the emphasis on peaceful cooperation and technological sharing. All of it was designed to ensure that if another Class 13 species ever achieved spaceflight, they would be either contained or eliminated before they could threaten galactic stability. Zethkri's breathing apparatus was working overtime as she processed the implications. Every aspect of galactic civilization that she had grown up believing was natural evolution was actually the result of trauma response to a single species that had nearly conquered them all. But if that was true, then the humans standing before them— "You're Class 13, she whispered, her words carrying clearly in the stunned silence of the hall. Captain Chen nodded. "Yes, we are. And you know what that means to us." "Yes, we do." Commander Liu Wei stepped forward, his movement causing every security system in the hall to activate automatically. "But here's what you need to understand about humans from Earth. We've spent the last 50 years studying your civilization from the edges of this galaxy. We've analyzed your technology, your social structures, your military capabilities, and your history. We know exactly how you dealt with the last Class 13 species that reached the stars." The holographic display changed again, now showing what appeared to be real-time images of human ships at the edge of Council space. Ships that were larger and more heavily armed than anything in the current galactic fleet, but somehow managing to avoid detection by the most sophisticated sensor networks the Council had developed. "We also know that you've grown soft, Dr. Sugira," Park said, his tone remaining conversational despite the revolutionary nature of his words. 3,000 years of peace has left your species technologically stagnant and militarily weak. You've optimized for cooperation and harmony, which are admirable traits, but you've lost the ability to adapt to genuine threats. "Is that a threat?" Council Prime Velcris asked, his tentacles arranging themselves in a defensive pattern that hadn't been seen in the assembly hall for centuries. Captain Chen's expression shifted into something that Zethkri realized was probably meant to be reassuring, but which triggered every predator detection system her evolved brain possessed. "Not at all. We're here to make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" Zethkri found herself asking, despite the fact that she wasn't officially part of the proceedings. "The same offer we would have made to the Kethvar if they had been capable of accepting it," Commander Liu Wei replied. "Partnership instead of conquest." The holographic display shifted once more, now showing detailed technical specifications for technology that was clearly centuries ahead of anything the Council possessed. Faster-than-light drives that didn't require the massive infrastructure currently needed for galactic travel. Energy sources that could power entire worlds without depleting resources. Medical technology that could extend lifespans indefinitely and cure genetic diseases that had plagued certain species for millennia. "Humans are Class 13, Captain Chen said, "which means we're very good at surviving impossible situations and adapting to new challenges. But unlike the Kethvar, we're also very good at cooperation. Our own history is full of conflicts, but we learned something they never did. We learned that working together makes us stronger than fighting alone." Park gestured to the technical displays. "Everything you see here was developed through international cooperation on Earth. No single human nation or government could have achieved spaceflight alone. We had to learn to work together, share resources, and build trust across cultural and biological differences that were sometimes greater than the differences between your various species." "But you're still Class 13, Delegate Morgith of the Spiral Coalition interjected. "The biological imperatives that drive your species toward aggression and violence haven't changed."
Commander Liu Wei nodded thoughtfully.
"You're absolutely right. Humans are aggressive, territorial, and capable of tremendous violence when threatened. We evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day, and we survived by becoming very, very good at killing things back." The casual way he stated this sent a collective shudder through the assembly. "But," Captain Chen continued, We also evolved something else. We learned that the most effective way to survive on Earth wasn't to kill everything around us, but to form alliances with other humans who could watch our backs while we watched theirs. We learned that a group of humans working together could overcome threats that would destroy any individual human. And over time, Dr. Catches, Park added, we learned to extend that principle beyond our own species. We domesticated predators that became our partners instead of our enemies. We formed symbiotic relationships with other species on our world. We learned that the strongest position wasn't being at the top of the food chain, but being at the center of a network of mutual survival relationships. The implications of what they were suggesting began to penetrate the shock that had settled over the assembly. Zithkri accessed her personal files on galactic military capabilities and felt her breathing apparatus falter as she realized how drastically unprepared the Council was for any kind of conflict. 3,000 years of peace had left them with ceremonial defense forces, exploration vessels equipped with minimal weapons, and a command structure designed for consensus building rather than rapid response to threats. If the humans decided to follow the Kethwar model, the current galactic order would collapse within a matter of months. What exactly are you proposing? Council Prime Velkris asked, his voice carrying harmonics that Zethkri recognized as barely contained panic. Captain Chen smiled, and for the first time since the humans had entered the hall, Zethkri saw something in that expression that wasn't terrifying. We're proposing that instead of trying to contain or eliminate us, you let us do what humans do best, solve problems that seem impossible. The holographic display changed to show star charts marking systems throughout the galaxy, each marked with different colored indicators. Your current galactic civilization is facing 17 different crisis situations that your current technological and social structures can't handle. Resource depletion in the core worlds, expansion pressure from non-council species in the outer rim, technological stagnation that's leaving you vulnerable to long-term threats, and, most critically, the gradual breakdown of the cooperative frameworks that have maintained galactic peace. Dr. Park highlighted specific systems on the display. Every one of these problems has been dealt with successfully by human civilizations on Earth. Resource management, territorial expansion, technological innovation, and social cooperation under stress. These are exactly the kinds of challenges that Class 13 species are evolved to handle. But you want something in return, Zethkri said, surprising herself by speaking up again. Commander Lu Wei nodded approvingly. Very good. Yes, we want something in return. We want full membership in the Galactic Council, with voting rights and access to all shared technologies and resources. We want trade agreements that allow human ships to travel freely throughout Council space. And we want the Class 13 designation removed from our records. And if we refuse? Velkris asked. The three humans exchanged those complex glances again, and Captain Chen's expression became unreadable. Then we'll respect your decision and withdraw to Earth. We'll continue developing our own technologies, expanding our own civilization, and dealing with our own challenges. And in a few hundred years, when the problems we've identified have grown beyond your ability to solve them, we'll still be here. The unspoken implication hung in the air like a toxic gas. The humans wouldn't attack or conquer if refused. But they also wouldn't help when the galactic civilization inevitably collapsed under the weight of its own peaceful stagnation. And when that collapse came, they would be the only species with the technology and experience necessary to rebuild. You're asking us to trust you, Zethkri said. Yes, we are, Captain Chen replied. Just as we're trusting you not to try to eliminate us the moment we leave this hall. The assembly erupted in a chaos of harmonic discussion as delegates from dozens of species tried to process what they had just learned. Everything they thought they knew about galactic history was wrong. Everything they believed about their own safety was an illusion. And now they were being asked to place their trust in the very type of species their entire civilization had been designed to prevent. But as Zethkri studied the technical displays still floating above the assembly floor, she realized that trust might not be the right word for what the humans were asking. They weren't requesting faith or belief. They were proposing a transaction based on demonstrated capability and mutual benefit. And perhaps most importantly, they were giving the Council a choice. As the debate raged around her, Zethkri found herself wondering if this was how the galaxy had looked to the Kethvar 3,000 years ago, a collection of peaceful, cooperative species who had forgotten how to fight for their survival. The difference was that the humans were offering partnership instead of conquest. The question was whether the Galactic Council was wise enough to accept it. The holographic display faded, leaving the three humans standing patiently in the center of the hall as 10,000 delegates struggled with a decision that would reshape their understanding of what it meant to be alive in a galaxy that had suddenly become far more dangerous and far more full of possibility than they had ever imagined. Outside the great crystalline walls of the assembly hall, human ships waited in the darkness between stars. Their weapons powered down, but their crews ready for whatever decision the galaxy would make about Earth's children and their dangerous gift of survival. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been running for 18 standard hours, and Ambassador Zethkri could feel the strain wearing on delegates who weren't accustomed to such intense, prolonged debate. The humans had been escorted to quarters within the council complex, but their presence seemed to permeate every discussion, every whispered conversation between species representatives who were struggling to process the fundamental shift in their understanding of galactic reality. Zethkri stood at the observation deck overlooking the main harbor of Nexus Prime, the Council's capital world, watching the daily parade of merchant vessels and diplomatic transports that had maintained galactic commerce for millennia. In the distance, barely visible against the stellar backdrop, she could make out the dark silhouettes of the human ships that had appeared seemingly from nowhere, positioned just outside the system's defense perimeter. The ships bothered her more than she cared to admit. Not because they were threatening, their weapons remained powered down and their crews had responded politely to all communication attempts, but because they represented technology that the Council's best scientists couldn't fully analyze, even with direct observation. The humans had achieved stealth capabilities that rendered them invisible to sensors until they chose to be seen, faster-than-light drives that left no detectable energy signatures, and ship designs that seemed to violate several principles of physics that the galactic community had considered immutable laws. Ambassador Zethkri, the voice belonged to Dr. Yultara, the Council's senior xenobiologist, and one of the few delegates who had managed to maintain scientific objectivity during the previous day's revelations. The humans have requested a private meeting with the Crisis Assessment Committee. They say they have additional information that wasn't appropriate for the General Assembly. Zethkri turned away from the viewport, noting the tension in Dr. Desak, Yultara's bioluminescent patterns. What kind of additional information? They wouldn't say. But they specifically requested that the meeting include representatives from the Spiral Coalition, the Centauri Republic, and the Altarian Collective. Dr. Kerosene and Campus. Yultara paused, her coloration shifting to indicate deep concern. Those are the three largest military powers in the Council, Ambassador. The implication was clear. Whatever the humans wanted to discuss, it was significant enough to require the presence of the species most capable of mounting an armed response. Zethkri felt her respiratory system adjust automatically to accommodate the stress response that was becoming all too familiar. When do they want to meet? Now. They're waiting in Conference Chamber 7. Conference Chamber 7 was one of the Council's most secure facilities, designed for discussions that required absolute privacy and equipped with sensors that could detect any form of electronic surveillance or biological eavesdropping. As Zethkri made her way through the complex's corridors, she noticed that the usual bustle of diplomatic activity had taken on an edge of nervous energy. Staff members moved more quickly than usual, and the harmonic background chatter that normally filled the common areas had been replaced by hushed, urgent conversations. The Crisis Assessment Committee consisted of 12 delegates representing the Council's most influential species, but when Zethkri entered the conference chamber, she found only 6 present: Hers, Health and Doctor, Yulthara from the Altarian Collective, General Mordek and Science Minister Veltar from the Centauri Republic, and Defense Coordinator Kresh V and Trade Representative Silwen from the Spiral Coalition. The 3 humans were already seated at the central conference table, their relaxed postures contrasting sharply with the visible tension of the Council representatives. Captain Chen looked up as the delegates took their seats, that same unsettling smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Thank you for coming," she said. "What we need to discuss is too sensitive for the General Assembly, but too important to delay." Dr. Park activated a small device that Zethkri's sensors registered as some form of advanced holographic projector, but the display that materialized above the table was unlike anything she had seen before. Instead of simple three-dimensional images, the projection seemed to contain layers of information that could be accessed through gesture controls, creating a dynamic, interactive representation of data that adjusted itself based on the viewer's focus and attention. Yesterday, we told you about the HFY and the real history of the Great War. Commander Lu Wei began. What we didn't mention is that the HFY weren't the only Class 13 species that achieved interstellar capability. The holographic display shifted to show a star map covering a region of space far larger than the current Council territory. Red indicators marked the locations of what appeared to be advanced civilizations, each one tagged with biological and technological data that made Zethkri's breathing apparatus flutter with alarm. There are currently 43 Class 13 species with active interstellar civilizations in this galaxy, Dr. Pulasada Park continued. 37 of them are located outside the current borders of Council space, but 6 are close enough to your territory to be considered potential threats. Defense Coordinator Kresh V leaned forward, his carapace clicking with agitation. That's impossible. Our long-range surveys would have detected advanced civilizations at those distances. Your long-range surveys detect civilizations that use technology similar to your own, Commander Lu Wei replied patiently. Class 13 species tend to develop along different technological paths, often using principles that your science considers impossible or impractical. The display zoomed in on one particular system, showing a civilization that appeared to have mastered gravitational manipulation to the point where they were restructuring entire solar systems for improved resource extraction. Another indicator revealed a species that had developed biotechnology so advanced that they had essentially merged with their machines, creating hybrid organisms capable of surviving in the vacuum of space without protection. Most concerning, Captain Chen said, highlighting a cluster of systems relatively close to the Council's outer territories, is the Valkyrie swarm. They achieved spaceflight approximately 800 years ago and have been expanding steadily ever since. Unlike humans, they never developed cooperative social structures. Their entire civilization is built on the principle of consuming and absorbing other species. The holographic display showed images that made several delegates activate their emergency medical systems. The Valkyrie appeared to be a hive mind species that reproduced by infecting other organisms with specialized parasites, gradually converting entire populations into extensions of their collective consciousness. Their ships were organic constructs that could adapt and evolve in real time, making them nearly impossible to defeat using conventional military tactics. According to our projections, Dr. Park said, manipulating the display to show predicted expansion patterns, the Valkyrie will reach Council space within the next 50 standard years, possibly sooner if they encounter resistance that forces them to accelerate their expansion schedule. Science Minister Veltar's harmonic voice carried undertones of skepticism. If these species are as dangerous as you claim, why haven't they already overrun this region of the galaxy? Because, Commander Lu Wei said grimly, they've been fighting each other. The holographic map expanded to show the full scope of what appeared to be an ongoing multi-sided conflict involving dozens of Class 13 civilizations. Battle lines shifted across hundreds of star systems, with territories changing hands in conflicts that involved the destruction of entire worlds and the extinction of species that had existed for millions of years. The galaxy beyond your borders isn't peaceful, delegates, Captain Chen said. It's a war zone that makes the ancient conflict with the HFY look like a minor territorial dispute. Class 13 species don't cooperate, they compete, and the ones that survive long enough to develop advanced spacefaring capabilities are the ones that have proven themselves capable of winning that competition. Zethkri found her voice despite the shock that was making her thought processes sluggish. But you're Class 13. If what you're saying is true, why aren't you part of this conflict? The three humans exchanged those complex glances again, and Zethkri realized that this was the question they had been expecting and dreading. Because, Dr. Park said quietly, we are part of it. We've been fighting the Valkyrie for the past 30 years. The silence that followed this statement was so complete that Zethkri could hear the subtle harmonic vibrations of the chamber's bioluminescent lighting systems. That's why we're here, Captain Chen continued. The Valkyrie are approximately 15 years away from breaking through our defensive perimeter. When that happens, they'll have direct access to Council space, and your current military capabilities won't be able to stop them. General Mordek activated his suit's threat assessment systems, and Zethkri could see the readout reflected in his visor. The Valkyries' projected capabilities exceeded Council defensive measures by several orders of magnitude. "You're asking us to join your war?" "No," Commander Lu Wei said firmly. "We're asking you to let us protect you from our war." The distinction was subtle but crucial. The humans weren't requesting military alliance or mutual defense agreements. They were offering to serve as a buffer between the Council's peaceful civilizations and the chaos of Class 13 competition. What would that protection cost us? Trade Representative Silwenan asked, her species' natural instinct for commercial analysis overriding the shock that had paralyzed the other delegates. "Full Council membership and the resources necessary to maintain our defensive operations," Captain Chen replied. "Access to your manufacturing capabilities, raw materials and logistics networks. In exchange, we'll ensure that the Valkyrie and any other Class 13 species that might threaten Council territory never reach your borders." Yulthara's bioluminescent patterns shifted to indicate deep analysis mode. "You're proposing to turn the Council into your supply base while you fight a war we can't even comprehend. We're proposing to turn the Council into partners in ensuring the survival of peaceful civilization in this galaxy." Dr. Park corrected. "The alternative is waiting for the Valkyrie to arrive and watching your worlds get converted into extensions of their hive mind." Defense Coordinator Kreshvi's carapace was clicking so rapidly that it created a staccato rhythm that filled the chamber. "Assuming we accept your proposal, what guarantees do we have that you won't simply become the dominant power in the Council? How do we know you won't eventually treat us the way the Kethvar treated your predecessors?" Commander Lu Wei activated his own device, and the holographic display changed to show detailed technical specifications for what appeared to be some form of technological integration system. "Because we're going to give you the tools to ensure we can't." The specifications were for weapons and defense systems that utilized human technological principles, but were specifically designed to be effective against human ships and tactics. It was a complete military technological package that would allow Council species to defend themselves against human aggression if such a situation ever arose. "You're giving us the means to fight you," Zethkri said, unable to keep the amazement out of her voice. "We're giving you the means to trust us," Captain Chen corrected. "The Kethvar failed because they thought strength came from keeping others weak. We've learned that real strength comes from making your allies strong enough to choose to remain your allies." General Mordek studied the weapon specifications with the eye of a career military officer. "These systems would give us defensive parity with your current technological base." "Better than parity," Dr. Park said. "They're designed to give you a significant advantage in defensive situations. The technology is specifically optimized for protecting fixed positions and civilian populations, things that Council species care about, but that Class 13 species often consider expendable." The implications were staggering. The humans were offering to create a technological balance that would make conquest of Council territory militarily impractical, while still maintaining their own ability to project force against external threats like the Valkyrie. It was a solution that addressed the fundamental problem of Class 13 integration, while preserving the peaceful nature of galactic civilization. "There's one more thing," Commander Lu Wei said, and his tone carried a weight that made every delegate's attention sharpen. "The Valkyrie aren't the only threat approaching Council space. Our intelligence indicates that at least 3 other Class 13 civilizations are expanding in this direction, and one of them has been specifically targeting peaceful, cooperative species for absorption." The holographic display showed the expansion patterns of multiple civilizations, all converging on the region of space currently controlled by the Council. It was clear that the arrival of the humans wasn't coincidental. They were part of a larger pattern of Class 13 expansion that was approaching a critical convergence point. "Your choice isn't whether to remain isolated from Class 13 conflicts," Captain Chen said. "Your choice is whether to face those conflicts with Class 13 allies or to face them alone." Science Minister Veltar's harmonic patterns shifted to indicate deep concern. "How long do we have to decide?" "The emergency session of the full council is scheduled to reconvene in 6 hours, Dr. Park replied. "The Valkyrie advance elements will reach the outer edge of our defensive perimeter in approximately 30 days. If we're going to integrate council manufacturing capabilities into our defensive strategy, We need to begin implementation immediately. Trade Representative Silwen was accessing economic projections on her personal display, and Zethkri could see her expression shifting from concern to something that might have been excitement. The manufacturing contracts alone would represent the largest economic expansion in Council history. The technological transfer agreements could advance our capabilities by centuries, and the military partnership would ensure that advancement continues instead of being interrupted by conquest, General Mordek added grimly. As the meeting continued, Zethkri found herself studying the three humans with growing fascination. Everything about them contradicted the traditional understanding of Class 13 behavior, yet they clearly possessed all the traits that made such species dangerous. They were aggressive enough to fight a 30-year war against an enemy that could absorb entire civilizations. They were territorial enough to view the Council's space as worth defending, and they were certainly violent enough to have developed weapons that surpassed anything in the galactic arsenal. But they were also cooperative enough to offer partnership instead of demanding submission. They were strategic enough to understand that strong allies were more valuable than conquered subjects, and they were wise enough to recognize that their own survival might depend on preserving the peaceful civilizations that could support them. When the meeting finally concluded, Zethkri remained in the chamber as the other delegates filed out to prepare for the crucial vote that would determine the future of galactic civilization. The humans were gathering their equipment, but Captain Chen noticed her lingering presence. "You have questions, Ambassador?" Zethkri arranged her breathing apparatus to accommodate what she hoped would be her final stress response of the day. Just one. If the situation were reversed, if we were the Class 13 species and you represented peaceful civilizations facing an external threat, would you trust us the way you're asking us to trust you? Captain Chen considered the question seriously, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. "No," she said finally. "We wouldn't. Class 13 species are dangerous by definition, and trusting them without verification would be suicidal. Then why should we trust you?" Commander Lu Wei looked up from his equipment packing. "Because you're not trusting us, Ambassador. You're trusting the weapons we're giving you to use against us if we betray that trust. There's a difference." As the humans left the conference chamber, Zethkri realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. A Class 13 species that had learned to weaponize trust itself. They weren't asking for faith or belief. They were offering to create a system of mutual assured survival that made betrayal counterproductive for all parties involved. It was, she realized, exactly the kind of impossible solution that a Class 13 species would be uniquely qualified to develop. Outside the conference chamber, the corridors of the council complex buzzed with activity as delegates prepared for the most important vote in 3,000 years of galactic civilization. The humans had given them all the information they needed to make an informed decision. Now they had to decide whether they were brave enough to trust their 6 months after the vote that changed galactic civilization forever. Ambassador Zethkri stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Nexus Defense Station, watching human and council engineering teams work together to install weapon systems that would have been considered impossible just a year ago. The sight still struck her as surreal. Beings from dozens of peaceful species working alongside humans whose casual conversations often included references to military tactics that could devastate entire star systems. The integration had not been smooth. 3 council species had withdrawn from the alliance entirely, choosing to relocate their civilizations to distant regions of the galaxy rather than participate in what they viewed as an abandonment of peaceful principles. 7 others had required extensive negotiation and cultural adaptation protocols before their populations could accept working alongside Class 13 partners. And the economic upheaval of shifting from a peace-oriented economy to one capable of supporting large-scale defensive operations had created challenges that were still being resolved. But it was working. "Ambassador," came the voice of Engineering Chief Tolmec, one of the Centauri Republic's most talented construction specialists. "The humans are requesting your presence in the command center. They say the Valkyrie probe ships have been detected." Zethkri felt her respiratory system adjust automatically, a response that had become depressingly familiar over the past months, as the reality of galactic warfare became part of her daily experience. The Valkyrie had arrived 2 weeks ahead of the most optimistic projections, their advanced scouts appearing at the edge of human space with the kind of precision that suggested their intelligence capabilities were more advanced than anyone had hoped. The command center of Nexus Defense Station was a marvel of hybrid technology that combined human tactical systems with council coordination networks, creating a command and control capability that neither civilization could have achieved independently. As Zethikri entered the chamber, she was struck once again by how naturally the two groups worked together despite their fundamentally different approaches to problem-solving. Captain Chen stood at the central tactical display, her attention focused on sensor readings that showed 3 Valkyrie probe vessels conducting what appeared to be systematic reconnaissance of the outer defensive perimeter. Beside her, Fleet Commander Yultara studied the same data with the analytical precision that had made her one of the Council's most respected military theorists. "They're not behaving according to our projections," Dr. Pravisky, Park said, highlighting specific movement patterns on the display. Standard Valkyrie tactics call for rapid probe and retreat operations designed to test defensive responses. These ships are conducting detailed scans as if they're looking for something specific. Commander Lu Wei manipulated the display to show a broader tactical overview. "They're mapping our defensive grid, but not in the way we expected. They're not testing our weapons, or trying to identify weak points. They're analyzing the composition of our fleet." "What does that mean?" Zethkri asked, though something in the human's tone suggested she might not want to know the answer. "It means," Captain Chen said grimly, "that they're trying to determine which ships and technologies belong to which species. They're not just scouting our defenses, they're cataloging our alliance structure." The implications of this were chilling. The Valkyrie weren't simply preparing to attack the defensive perimeter. They were analyzing the political and military relationships between the human and council forces, looking for ways to fracture the alliance before launching their main assault. Fleet Commander Yultara's bioluminescent patterns shifted to indicate deep tactical analysis. "They're planning to target the council ships specifically, aren't they? They want to eliminate our participation in the defense so they can deal with the humans separately." "That would be the logical approach," Dr. Park confirmed. "Divide the alliance, eliminate the weaker partners, then overwhelm the remaining forces with concentrated assault. Except," Commander Lu Wei said, his expression shifting into something that Zethkri had learned to recognize as particularly dangerous, "they're making the same mistake that every species makes when they analyze human alliances." Captain Chen activated a new display that showed the actual composition and capabilities of the combined fleet. What had appeared to be separate human and council formations was revealed to be a deeply integrated force structure, where each type of vessel had been optimized to support the others in ways that weren't immediately apparent from external observation. They see human ships with advanced weapons and council ships with limited firepower, and they assume the council vessels are weak links in our defensive chain, Dr. Park explained. What they don't realize is that the council ships aren't designed to fight independently. The tactical display highlighted the sensor and coordination systems that had been installed on every council vessel, systems that allowed them to serve as force multipliers for human combat operations. A single council ship could coordinate the fire of dozens of human vessels, creating targeting solutions and battle management capabilities that far exceeded what either group could achieve alone. "It's the same principle we used during the integration process," Captain Chen said. "Instead of trying to make council species into warriors, we gave them the tools to make human warriors more effective." Zethkri studied the tactical readouts and realized she was looking at something unprecedented in galactic history, a military alliance that had been specifically designed to leverage the strengths of both aggressive and peaceful species. The humans provided the firepower and tactical aggression, while the council species provided the coordination and strategic thinking that allowed that aggression to be applied with maximum efficiency. "So when the Valkyrie target our ships," she said slowly, "they'll actually be targeting the most critical components of your defensive system." "Exactly," Commander Lu Wei confirmed. "And since they don't understand the true function of council vessels in our tactical structure, they'll probably allocate insufficient force to ensure those attacks succeed." The elegance of the strategy was both impressive and slightly terrifying. The humans had created a defensive system that turned the apparent weakness of their council allies into a hidden strength, while simultaneously making any attack on those allies a critical threat to the overall alliance. "Incoming transmission from the probe ships," announced the communication officer, a young human whose casual competence in handling first contact protocols still amazed Zethkri. "They're requesting direct communication with Alliance leadership." "On screen," Captain Chen ordered, and the central display shifted to show the interior of a Valkyrie vessel that looked more like the inside of a living organism than a constructed ship. The being that appeared on screen was barely recognizable as having once been an individual creature. Its body had been so extensively modified by Valkyrie parasites that it appeared to be more machine than biological entity. Human vessels, the Valkyrie spokesperson said in a voice that seemed to come from multiple sources simultaneously. We offer terms for the integration of your alliance into the Valkyrie collective. Join us willingly, and your species will retain limited autonomy within our structure. Captain Chen stepped forward, her posture relaxed but her expression radiating the kind of confidence that came from absolute certainty. We decline your offer. Withdraw from this system immediately or face the consequences of continued aggression. The Valkyrie spokesperson tilted its head in a gesture that might have been curiosity if performed by an individual creature, but which came across as deeply unsettling when performed by a collective entity. You cannot hope to resist indefinitely. We have absorbed 47 species over the past 800 years. Your peaceful allies will abandon you when they realize the cost of resistance. Our allies aren't peaceful, Fleet Commander Yul Thara said, stepping into view of the communication pickup. They're methodical. The statement was delivered with the kind of calm certainty that Zethkri had learned to associate with council species when they had reached a decision that they considered final. But something in the way Yultara said it made the Valkyrie spokesperson pause, its multiple voice sources falling silent for several seconds. Explain this statement, the collective entity demanded. Dr. Park activated a new display that showed detailed battle analysis from the previous 30 years of human-Valkyrie conflict. You've been fighting humans under the assumption that we're a typical Class 13 species, aggressive, territorial, and ultimately self-destructive. But humans have one advantage that you haven't encountered in your previous conquests. We've learned how to make friends, Commander Lu Wei said simply. The holographic display shifted to show the current composition of the Alliance fleet, but now the readouts included tactical capabilities that hadn't been visible during the initial reconnaissance. Council vessels that had appeared to be lightly armed research ships were revealed to be carrying weapons that had been specifically designed to counter Valkyrie adaptive technologies. Trade ships that seemed to be civilian vessels were actually mobile manufacturing platforms that could produce ammunition and replacement parts during extended conflicts. Every species you've absorbed was fighting you alone, Captain Chen explained. They had their own resources, their own technologies, and their own limitations. When you overwhelmed their capabilities, they had nowhere to turn for support. We, on the other hand, Zethkri found herself saying, surprising herself by joining the conversation, have 43 species working together to solve the problem of how to kill you efficiently. The Valkyrie spokesperson's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Its collective voice sources began chattering in what appeared to be rapid internal communication, and its body posture shifted into something that even Zethkri could recognize as defensive uncertainty. You are bluffing, the entity finally said. Peaceful species cannot contribute meaningfully to military operations. Fleet Commander Yulthara's bioluminescent pattern shifted into what Zethkri recognized as genuine amusement. Would you like a demonstration? The next 10 minutes provided what Dr. Park would later describe as the most effective diplomatic presentation in galactic history. The Alliance fleet conducted a coordinated exercise that showcased capabilities no Valkyrie probe had ever encountered. Human ships executing tactical maneuvers coordinated by Council sensor networks. Weapons firing patterns calculated by collective intelligence systems from dozens of species, and defensive formations that adapted in real time based on strategic analysis that incorporated the best military thinking from 43 different evolutionary backgrounds. It was, Zethkri realized, exactly what should have been expected from a Class 13 species that had learned to cooperate. Humans had all the aggressive capabilities that made Class 13 civilizations dangerous. But they had somehow managed to multiply those capabilities by partnering with species that approached problems from completely different perspectives. The demonstration you have observed represents approximately 12% of our current defensive capabilities, Captain Chen said calmly. The remaining 88% is currently being held in reserve for the main battle, which will commence as soon as your probe ships transmit their reconnaissance data to your main fleet. You have 36 hours to withdraw all Valkyrie forces from this system. Commander Lu Wei continued. After that time, we will consider your presence an act of war against the entire alliance, and we will respond accordingly. The Valkyrie spokesperson was silent for nearly a full minute, its multiple voice sources creating a background hum that suggested intense internal deliberation. When it finally spoke, its tone had shifted from confident intimidation to something that sounded almost like uncertainty. The collective will consider your terms, it said. But understand that withdrawal from this system does not indicate abandonment of our expansion plans. We will find another route to the resources we require. No, you won't, Dr. Park said with the kind of scientific certainty that had made him one of Earth's leading xenobiologists. Because we've been sharing our anti-Valkyrie technologies with every Class 13 species in this region of the galaxy. Your expansion has been permanently stopped. The implications of this statement were staggering. The humans hadn't just been fighting the Valkyrie. They had been conducting a comprehensive diplomatic and military campaign to unite all the Class 13 species in the region against a common threat. The same cooperative instincts that had allowed them to form an alliance with the Council had been applied to the chaotic conflicts between aggressive civilizations. That's impossible, the Valkyrie spokesperson said, but its voice carried undertones that suggested it was beginning to doubt its own statement. Class 13 species don't cooperate with each other. Your own intelligence data confirms this. Class 13 species don't cooperate with each other, Captain Chen agreed. But humans aren't just any Class 13 species. We're Class 13 species that learned how to make the impossible become inevitable. The communication ended abruptly, leaving the command center in silence as the full impact of what had just occurred began to sink in. The Valkyrie had been presented with a type of opposition they had never encountered, not just advanced military capabilities, but a fundamental restructuring of how interstellar conflicts could be approached. Will they actually withdraw? Zethkri asked. They'll withdraw from this system, Commander Lu Wei said confidently. But they'll also begin searching for other Class 13 species to absorb, hoping to counter our advantages through rapid expansion. Which brings us to Phase 2 of the long-term strategy. Dr. Park said, activating a display that showed star charts covering a region of space far larger than anything they had previously discussed. Now that we've demonstrated the effectiveness of human council cooperation, it's time to start offering the same partnership arrangements to other civilizations. Zethkri stared at the scope of what the humans were proposing. They weren't just planning to defend Council space. They were planning to transform the entire nature of galactic civilization by creating networks of cooperative alliances that could stand against any threat. You're trying to end the age of Class 13 conflicts, she said. We're trying to start the age of Class 13 cooperation, Captain Chen corrected. The conflicts will continue, but there'll be conflicts between cooperative alliances rather than individual species fighting alone. As Zethkri watched the tactical displays showing Valkyrie probe ships beginning their withdrawal from the system, she realized that she was witnessing the beginning of a transformation that would reshape galactic civilization for millennia to come. The humans hadn't just shattered the Council's expectations about Class 13 species. They had shattered the fundamental assumptions about how advanced civilizations could interact with each other. 6 months ago, the idea of trusting a Class 13 species with the survival of galactic civilization would have been considered insane. Now, as she watched human and council crews working together to prepare for challenges that neither group could face alone, Zethkri understood that trust had been the wrong word all along. The humans hadn't asked for trust. They had offered partnership, backed by the tools and knowledge necessary to make that partnership work. They had created a system where betrayal was counterproductive and cooperation was the optimal strategy for all parties involved. It was, she realized, exactly the kind of impossible solution that could only have been developed by a species that had learned to survive on a Class 13 Deathworld by making friends with everything that tried to kill them. As the months turned into years, and the Alliance expanded to include species from across the galaxy, historians would mark the moment when humanity stepped onto the galactic stage as the end of one age and the beginning of another. The age of peaceful isolation was over. The age of cooperative survival had begun, and at the center of it all were the children of Earth, the Class 13 species that had learned the most dangerous lesson any civilization could master: how to turn their greatest weakness into their greatest strength, and their enemies into their friends. The galaxy would never be the same. But for the first time in 3,000 years, it would be truly safe for those who chose cooperation over conquest, partnership over domination, and survival together over destruction alone.
The humans had kept their promise.
They had shattered galactic expectations in exactly the way the galaxy needed most, by proving that even the most dangerous species could choose to become the most valuable allies if given the chance to show what they were really capable of when they stopped fighting the universe and started working with it instead. Survival to the very kind of species their entire civilization had been designed to avoid. When Earth's Class 13 Deathworld status shattered galactic expectations.